All right, so next project is going to be much more advanced. We're going to install the PS1Digital HDMI kit from Black Dog Tech, Dan Coon's Citrus 3000 is what he's known as on Twitter. We're going to go ahead and install that kit to essentially replace the serial port, which is really not used except for a few Link games. Not really any games I care about. Replace that with an HDMI port with a 3D printed slot. So if you want to, you can go back and watch my power supply replacement video or capacitor replacement. I've already done that. And I showed how to get the top chassis off. So we've already disconnected the power supply and removed the top part of the case and exposed the X-Station mod and the top RF shield. So what I'm going to do is gently lift this off the brass standoffs that would normally house your optical drive, and then I'm going to, you know what, I'll just use my fingers. I'm going to open, well, kind of hard to do this and talk at the same time. You want to open, you don't want to yank this flat flex cable out of the X-Station. You'll damage the connector. So you want to open that little tan part. You want to slide those tabs, pull it back to open it, and then just gently slide out the flex cable here. And once you've done that, you can free the X-Station. I'm going to leave the extension. I'm going to leave the extension 3D print from Greg Collingall, or Greg Collins. I apologize if I'm butchering the name. Laser Bear Industries does great work. Set that aside. So this is the top RF shield, and this is the flex cable going to the quick solder board of the X-Station mod. So as I mentioned in my PSU video, Sony on these PlayStations puts arrows where screws go. So there, and so forth. So there's 1, 2. Actually, that one comes off later. That's part of the mod you have to do. You have to bend part of the RF shield up. I've done some prep work already. So I think there's only 3 or 4 screws here. F it, we're doing it live. All right, so fail at life like I am right now. I do not see how the big boys record this and do it on camera. I'm just using my phone. All right, so take that out. You suck. Okay, here we go. Screw this. These are all just plain old Phillips head screws. All these like bronze brass looking screws, they should be the same length and thread pitch, but I like to keep them separate. And you know what? I'm gonna move them over here to this compartment, just so I don't get them mixed up, because I'm gonna need these other ones for later screws. Take this one out. I think that's all of them. Now, tip I learned from Voltar and Dubsenhauer, some of those guys on YouTube, you don't want to just yank this thing out. You want to kind of, there's these little standoffs here, little pegs it slides onto, and they have a good friction fit. You can't just yank this thing out. And there's also tabs that it kind of slides into the lower RF shield. So what I like to do is to kind of brace one hand on the case and kind of wiggle try to wiggle it free from these CD-ROM standoffs. Doesn't feel like it's wanting to come out. Did I miss a screw? I don't think I did. There it goes. Or you can also kind of grab here and brace and just pull, but you want to be gentle about it. So then maybe, you know, pull here, get that part free. Oh, okay. So I accidentally stopped recording right as I was getting this free. But anyway, you want to be really careful removing it because that slit right there, that narrow gap in this top shield is where this X-Station quick solder flex cable threads through, and you really don't want to damage that. They're not cheap to replace. But we got the top shield, and a couple things you have to do to prep this, and these are all in the installation instructions. You can also check you know, Voltar or iFix Retro, Long Island Gaming, Dubes and Howard. All those guys have great videos. You want to first of all, let me just set this down here and get my tweezers, my pointing tweezers. So there's these little dimples here. I think this was, yeah, I had to do this for the, this is prep work for this mod. So you have to, this one up here by that peg. So again, if you flip the board over, this is how it would be. You flip it over, and this little nubbin right here, you could, I just went in with some flush cuts like Dan Coons recommends. And, you know, cut it flush. I know Voltar recommends using a step bit to drill it out. As long as it's flush and you don't have any sharp burrs there, you just don't want that. You want it flush like that. Otherwise, it could damage the PS1Digital board. You also, again, I mashed the button. Okay, so you also want to, normally this little tab here would be bent downward, kind of where those J or U-shaped pieces are. It would usually be sticking out like that. I just took some needle nose pliers and bent it up so it's flush with the rest of the top shield. And again, that's to keep it from damaging the PS1Digital board underneath. There's other videos out there. I've already done it. I did it when I had the system open for the X-Station install. So I'm just going to set this aside. And here it is. You want to make sure that your motherboard is compatible. If it's a 5501, it should have a PU18 motherboard, which is the motherboard revision that's compatible with both the X-Station mod and the PS1Digital, but it's fairly easy to do a motherboard swap on a PS1. So I wouldn't buy the kit unless you've opened it up and verified your motherboard revision. Again, it's going to be on the silk screen here. It starts with PU. This is a PU18. So I've already done the X-Station install where I've removed, you know, a heat RF shield. I think it's just an RF shield. Another shield piece of metal, but it's soldered in. I've already done that. And there's a piece of copper that's taped on there. You don't need those once you get, you know, going forward. And I've already done the pin lifting, and I left some Kapton tape, or Kapton, I don't know how you pronounce that. Put some insulation tape there under the lifted pins, just for peace of mind. Not too bad for my first X-Station install. So now we need to free the motherboard, because we've got to work on, you just don't want to work on it when it's in the chassis. I don't think for the PS1Digital you have to work on the bottom, but I'm not positive. I'll have to refer back to the installation instructions. I'm pretty sure all the soldering is done on the top. But again, notice how at this stage on the motherboard, we don't have an arrow there because we took that screw out already. But we have an arrow here, again, denoting which screws need to come out. So we need to take out the screw here for the This is the serial port, I think. Or no, that's the, I'm sorry, that's the audio analog out. And also the screws for anywhere you see those silk screened arrows, you want to take the screws out. Parallel port, serial port. And are there any other screws here? I don't think so. I think those are the only screws keeping the motherboard placed. So I'm going to go ahead and remove those. Okay, so I was correct. Those 1, 2, 3, 4... Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not this one. 5 screws are holding the motherboard in. So you can gently lift this out now, exposing the bottom RF shield. And just in case you wonder what it looks like, this was the QSB for the X-Station mod. So go ahead and set the motherboard on our mat. And we don't need to do anything to the bottom RF shield. So I'm going to set this aside. So now we have our PS1 motherboard ready to work. You know what? Yeah, I'll just leave that flex cable there for now. I'll just have to be careful. So now the first order of business is going to be soldering flex cables. So I'm going to start with the easier ones. They come on this nice little film here. The most difficult one is definitely the GPU flex. I'm going to start with the controller flex cable up here. That's usually the easiest one. And then go with the removal with the serial port, the audio flex cable, and the GPU flex cable. So these you just kind of gently lift them out. You should just peel right out. You want to be careful though, these are not cheap to get replaced. Let's set that phone down for a moment. Okay, I have my controller flex cable free. I'm gonna go ahead and free the. All right, so the first step, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and remove this X-Station cable because it's just getting in the way. So same idea. You just slide. You don't want to yank this thing out. You want to first open the little bar here. There's tabs. You just kind of make, slide it out. And this should just come right out. It should just come out with like minimal force. If you feel resistance, double check and make sure you've got this open, because otherwise it's still kind of clamped onto that flex cable. I want to set that with the X-Station. So now we don't have that flex cable in the way for the X-Station. So what we're first going to do is this connector here, CN102. That's the controller assembly connector. So what you want to do is to solder this flex cable onto that, where these it's an interesting shaped cable. It's kind of hard to do this while I'm filming with my phone. Essentially, it's going to kind of grab onto those pins on the side here. So if you see where those, I'm trying to get it to focus. So you see where there's kind of like little cutouts there. Those you want to get right up on those pins, flush with the board, and you want to solder those pins to those pads on the flex cable, and ditto on the other side. And I may start with this side. Just I'll have more room to work with on this side. You might have to. What I've seen installers do is kind of, hold it down and just kind of bring some solder load it onto your tip and kind of just tack it into place on one of these pins just to hold it. And then that way it frees up your other hand. You can come in there and properly join these. So there's no way I can do that while filming with my phone. So I'm gonna do that off camera and be right back. Okay, so we have the controller flex cable. Notice it says on all these flex cables, it says solder on this side. So basically you want that side facing up. So we've got, I'm gonna try and zoom in a little bit. So we've got good joins, it appears, here on that side. And as well, you know what, I may need to reflow that second pin. Let me do that. All right, that's looking much better now. That's why you always want to go back and inspect your work. So I'm going to now, before I proceed to the next phase of the install, I actually brought out my multimeter here. It's my E-Vlog Bryman meter. Go ahead and set it for continuity. This will be different for any multimeter. You want to essentially find whatever, mine's on the resistance, the Greek letter omega, which means ohms for resistance. But you see there's also kind of a speaker or sideways Wi-Fi. That's going to be your continuity, right, on this particular meter. So if I touch, just to test, if I touch the two pins, I get continuity. Okay, so what I'm going to do is try to set up my phone on a little stand here. I'm going to try to record me testing. I'm going to zoom back out. Continuity. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure when I touch one pin, let me zoom in here. I'm going to touch one pin and the next pin. I should not hear a beep. This means I don't have any bridges. Or shorts, which is good. So now I'm going to hold my one probe to that pad, and I'm going to just very lightly touch the flex cable pads here. These traces here are so small though. But essentially I'm going to touch the pin there and a pin on the flex cable and make sure I'm only getting continuity on one, but I'm not getting it on the others. So these pads are really small here on this flex cable. So I'm going to pause the video while I do that. All right, multimeter shows continuity with one pad to one pin each, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. It means we have no shorts, no damages to the traces on the flex cable. So now the next order of business is going to be I lied earlier when I said we're not going to be working on the bottom of this board. We need to desolder the serial port, which is going to be this one here, this assembly here next to the parallel port. That's going to be where our serial port flex cable is going to live. It's going to go here, but you can't put it there while these pins are in place. You actually have to remove the assembly and then solder this to the empty vias. And that's going to be for HDMI output. So the idea is going to be to introduce fresh solder and flux and I know to me, when I was first learning, it seems counterproductive. Well, Tim, you're gonna, hey man, you're removing these components. Why are you adding new solder? You want to reflow these with new solder so that you're essentially mixing the new solder with the old and kind of getting those chemistries stable, it really just helps to pull the solder off. If you've mixed new solder in with the old, it makes it melt and flow a lot easier rather than just trying to pull off this 20-plus-year-old solder. So I don't have my desoldering gun yet. That's a pricey purchase, but I've been having good luck so far with my Engineer Japanese SS02 solder sucker with the silicone tip. And if I have trouble with these thicker ground planes here, I may have to break out the braid. But, just go slow, be patient, don't lift the traces, and I will go and do that and be right back. Actually, you know what? I may try to, now that I have this little stand, I don't know how well this is going to work. I may try to show this on camera here. It's kind of hard to do this with the phone in the way, but let's see. We'll see if I can do it. So first I'm going to flux up these pins here. Some No Clean MG Chemicals liquid No Clean flux. And I'm going to add, I switched to my J-tip. I'm more comfortable with that tip for this kind of work because I can get in there at a better angle and hit those pins on the vias. You just have to pick a pin, a tip that you're comfortable with and that is appropriate for the work. So I switched to my curved J02 tip, and I've already let me re-tin this tip here. So if you're not familiar with tip tinning, let me clean off. I mean, it's already tinned, but I can re-tin it. So I'm going to introduce some new solder here and just wipe it off on my sponge. And now you have a nice, clean, tinned tip. So put a little bit of solder on here. That's going to help with heat transfer, and we're just going to go ahead and introduce some new solder. Once it's gone molten, just introduce a little new solder in. There we go. Make sure it flows there. Clean my tip. Add some more flux. Flux is your friend. I don't know how easy this is showing up on camera, but when it goes liquid, that's when you really want to add the new solder. That's where you kind of get it mixed in here with the old solder. Let me do this last one here. Oh, got a little bridge there. It's okay, we'll just flow that together. If you get a bridge on this part, I mean, don't sweat it because you're going to be sucking all this solder off anyway. But now we're going to add more flux, because why not? And now we're going to start. Got my solder sucker primed. Go gold or molten. There we go. So now we're just going to. This would go a lot quicker if I had a nice desoldering gun like a Hacko FR301 or something, but I don't have one of those yet. Thankfully, this solder sucker is, I mean, it's not cheap. It's like a $20+ solder sucker, and I know there are cheaper ones on the market, but Didn't quite get all the solder off that time, so I'm going to add fresh solder and try sucking it off again with the manual pump. You can get cheaper solder suckers that have those white Teflon tips, but I found this silicone tip. I saw this in one of Dubes and Howard's videos. He had something similar to this, and it is worth every penny. The silicone tip, you can actually, as long as you're not running your iron too hot, you can, actually cover the whole area, solder tip and all, and just evacuate all that solder while it's still good and molten. The Teflon tips are really going to melt if you try to do that. But this is just a dream. I mean, this is just, as far as manual solder pumps go, I mean, this one's just so much higher quality than those cheaper, $3-5 ones you see on Amazon or eBay. Okay, so I'm going to clean my tip, re-tin it. It's getting a little dingy there. Right. Occasionally you're going to have spent flux build up on your tip. So you definitely want to re-tin every so often. I just kind of, if I notice the solder is not flowing as well, then I'll check my tip. I mean, if you start seeing like a little bit of residue there, go ahead and clean it off. That's better. You want a nice tinned silvery tip there. Watching Voltar's videos, I really have come to like the JO2 tip. It's a very versatile tip, and a lot of people, their go-to is the chisel. I'm just, I guess maybe it's the way I'm holding my iron, but I've just had a much better time with the J-tip, because you can really, you can do, side, apply the heat on the side, you can apply it on the tip. It's just one of my favorite go-to tips, but I am going to have to switch probably to a smaller tip when I do those small flex cables. So I'm going to add a little bit of fresh solder to my tip just for heat transfer, because now we're going to do these ground planes. So let's see. Looks like it got a good bit out. See if I can get the rest of it there. All right, get it good and molten, and pump. Clean my tip. And pump. Oh, that slipped off there. Slipped off the pad while I was pushing the button. There we go. That's much better. Gosh, I am not sponsored by anybody, because if I was, I would have an actual desoldering gun. But I'm telling you, this Japanese made, get some more flux on here. This Japanese made solder sucker is so much, oh my gosh, it's one of the best tools purchases I've made recently. So nice. Okay, so go ahead and release my pump there. Rest my. Okay, so let's see. Are we getting any wiggle action here? It looks like. Switch back to the wider angle. Oh, looks like those vias are free, but it looks like we still have to still have a little bit of solder on those ground planes. So I'm going to try to, I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but I'm going to try to gently reach from under here. Switch back out. I'm going to try to just gently wiggle this loose. I do want to preserve this port because I saw on Twitter or one of Dan Coons' recent videos that he was Black Dog Tech or Pixel FX Co. Can't remember which. One of them was working on some sort of adapter that uses that old it's going to use this old serial port. So I'm going to add a little, re-add some solder here. Try to suck it back off again. May have to break out the braid. I hate soldering braid. I just have such a hard time with it. Help if I actually primed the pump. I know some people are old school and like to use the braid, but I have had the worst luck with solder braid. I don't know why. I must be doing something wrong. But I may have to break down and try to use the braid. All right, let's see if I got those thick boy ground planes any looser. What I'm doing is I'm not really putting much pressure. You don't want to yank this thing out. I'm just trying to like heat it. Trying to heat these bigger tabs here to try and see if I can gently apply pressure from the underside and get it loose. There's so much of a ground plane there, just sucking up all that heat. Yeah, I may have to break out the soldering braid. Okay, so I've got some desoldering wick or braid here. I'm gonna try to see if I can get the rest of this pad cleaned. So you want to use a lot of flux on this. I'm gonna turn my iron up a little bit to 335. And just try to wick up some of this some of the rest of this solder here to free this. The reason I'm using the tweezers to hold it is this braid is woven copper and it will get very hot. Copper is a great conductor of heat. It also likes to hold heat. It gets very, very, very hot very quickly. Okay, let's add some more flux. A lot of the trouble I was having when I first started soldering was I was running my iron way too hot. I mean, I was running that thing at like 350, 360 Celsius, and I was just ripping up traces left and right. So I've definitely learned to try and go with a lower heat if possible. Okay. Some more flux here. Okay. My tip is not clean. Maybe part of the problem. Let me re-tin it. I see some people holding braid with their hands, and I'm like, how on earth are you doing that? Because this stuff gets hot. I don't know how people hold soldering braid or wick with their fingers while they're heating it with an iron. I really don't. I mean, they must have better pain tolerance than I do. There we go. All right, so let's see now. Let me clean my tip off. Let's see if we get some wiggle action here on this. Man, this is not wanting to come loose. I'm having a bugger of a time with this. All right, let's get the soldering braid out again. Ouch. This is why you use tweezers, but I was just having a really hard time getting in there with tweezers. I hate using this stuff so much. Maybe if I was better at it, I would like it more. I've just always had the worst luck. Maybe I need to get better braid. I was, didn't really know what I was buying when I was buying this stuff. Maybe I need to just pony up for the good MG Chemicals braid. People seem to have better luck with that. Okay. Any better? Let's try. I want to work a little bit of this off camera and see if I can get this thing out. Okay. Finally got this thing out. Just took a lot of patience with the braid and the solder sucker. I noticed though when I was gently wiggling it, these big ground plane pins, these anchor pins were actually wiggling, but two of the pins in the middle that I thought were completely free, no bueno on that wiggle action. So that was, derp moment on my side. So lots of sticky flux on there. So let's go ahead and get that cleaned off. Some isopropyl alcohol, and a toothbrush. We'll set this to the side because whenever that adapter gets released, we plan to use it. So I'm going to definitely do the same thing on this area here. There was lots of flux in use, so we definitely want to clean up this area as best as we can. Put a little more IPA on there. Okay, so we are good to go here. We now have a cleaned and you can see light through all those. Awesome. So I'm going to clean up some of that solder that got pumped out. Clean that off my workspace and move to soldering the serial port flex cable, which I believe goes this side, but I'm going to double check. Okay, so I went back to the install instructions and did confirm that the serial port connector goes, it's going to go like that. You have to line it up on these holes here. It's a little tricky because this little blue component there has to stay in place. So what I like to do is get that kind of, give it a rough alignment, and then come back, kind of do the same thing we did with the controller port flex. We'll clean our tip, load it up with some solder. And this is not going to be pretty. This is just, oh, my iron went to sleep. I'm going to turn it back on here. You normally are wanting to solder, touching your tip to the pad and then bring in the solder. But for something like here, we're going to do a quick contact solder just to kind of, you know, it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be a good electrical connection. It's really just there to provide minimal structural support while, you know, to free up a hand. So I'm going to go ahead and tin up my tip here. Nice and shiny. And put, you know, you don't want a ton of solder, but just, you know, a good little blob. And try not to burn yourself doing this. You want to align those holes as best you can. I'm going to tack that one. And I did graze my fingertip. Nice little burn there. Lovely. I've had worse. Okay. So we're now going to introduce some liquid flux. And now that our hand's free, we are going to solder the rest of these. I'm going to turn my iron back down to 330. I had to turn it higher for that. For that controller port connection. You want to make sure that you're covering the entire trace on the flex cable with solder. but you also don't want to bridge these connections here. Let me clean my tip. Bring in some more flux. And now we're going to clean up. Just do a little reflow work here. Don't like the way those dimples look. And just a little more. All right, let's go ahead and clean off the flux with some IPA. Let's examine our work here. Looks like we got decent welds here. I don't like how I have to redo this one here. I don't like how that looks. Probably doesn't need much more solder. Just probably need to reflow it a bit. There we go. Just retouching. Retouching these just to make sure I've got good filled holes here. All right, so let's clean that off again. All right, let's see if we can do some quick continuity testing. Get our meter probes. Make sure we don't have any bridges. Good, okay. I'm gonna start here. All right. These contact points are so small. So second one should go to this second pad here. Actually, that goes to the third one. The first one's not connected. So second pad, third pad. Wait. Okay, why am I getting... that one looks good. Basically just making sure that I'm only getting continuity to one of these pads on the left for each via that I soldered to. I'm not sure, this one I'm getting continuity to 2 points, and I'm not sure why. Getting it here and here, so let me make sure there's not... I don't see a bridge on the other side there. And I confirmed I don't have any bridges. Confirmed I don't have any bridges here. So, there may be something bringing continuity on the actual board itself. So, I'm going to just go with the test points later on. So, I mean, as long as the main concern is to make sure that you don't have any bridges here. And let's check the other side. We got good fills there. I'm happy. Let me clean this off just a little bit. I'm satisfied with that. All right, so the next stage is going to be, let me move my D-series tip. Actually, it's cooled off enough. So I'm going to actually, I'm trying to remember, I don't remember who, if I can find the link on Thingiverse, I'll put it in the description, but this is a nice T12 solder tip holder that I found on Thingiverse, or somebody on Twitter maybe shared it with me. It might have been Laser Bear, but anyway, it's just great for holding these tips. I love it. There's so many cool things people make on there. So next is going to be our penultimate flex cable, which is going to be, I believe it goes to this audio chip. I'm gonna have to refer back to my directions just to be sure. And I don't remember. Let me check my instructions. I'll be right back. Okay, so before we do the next flex cable, there's a small surface mount capacitor here, right there, that we have to float off and take it out of circuit before we can do the rest of the GPU flex cable. I mean, I could go ahead and do the audio flex cable. I'm gonna go ahead, take a break from the flex cables, and let's see if I can rig up my phone stand again. So again, if you're paying attention at home, it's this little capacitor right here. So thankfully removing surface mount components is fairly easy. I'm gonna introduce some fresh solder, and you just kind of like go back and forth on both ends, and you almost want to, essentially flood it off the board with solder. This will be replaced by capacitors on the flex cable, I believe. Oh, almost got it. There we go. Let me tell you, these things, these SMD components are tiny. So this is my pinky finger for comparison. So let me go ahead and just Move this out of the way. And let's make sure we didn't bridge any pads here. Let me clean that up with some IPA and a toothbrush. Get a cleaner toothbrush. Nope, does not appear. Where to go? Does not appear that we bridged anything. Although that might be that might be a stray blob of solder there. Next to that number 11 test point right there. I'm gonna check, make sure that wasn't there. It looks like that solder pad was there already. When I went back and looked at some reference photos and video, so I'm just gonna clean that. Clean that up a little bit. All right, now we're gonna move on to the audio flow. Okay, so I'm gonna move to the audio pins next. So essentially, you want to align those teeth with those pads, the pins. You can kind of see where the pad, those pins, let's see if I can demonstrate this with my pointer, with my tweezers. So these pins coming off the chip rest on top of the solder pads there, and that's how they're soldered to the motherboard. So you want to bring these teeth right up to, and I just knocked it out of alignment. You want to bring it right up to those pins, and using plenty of flux, solder this on. So the solder is going to flow around the pad and join the pin and through that hole and join the solder pad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up roughly like, it's hard to do this while I'm filming, but you want to line this up, and I'm going to tack it kind of toward the middle or toward the right side with a blob of solder. These far two right pins are not connected, but I'm going to have to do this under magnification. My eyes are just, I mean, I don't need glasses, but I would really be more comfortable doing this under the big magnifier here. So I'm going to do that, get it tacked in place, and be right back. Well, actually, I may try to film it. I'm just going to film it from the side here. So if I get in the way, apologies ahead of time. Get my alignment. And I am actually going to switch tips. I have a tip grabber, a silicone tip grabber attached to my soldering iron. I'm going to switch to a very small, I forget the designation. I call it a hoof tip. I'm going to switch to that tip. Let's see. It is a BC1 tip. Or actually, yeah. Let's switch to a BC1 tip. Because you really don't need a lot of solder here. So, kind of just, yeah. See how it's kind of like a hoof shape? So I'm going to switch that tip in. Just tell my Kescher soldering station that I've switch tips so it can change the heating thermal profile. What did I say that was again? BC1, Bravo Charlie 1. Okay, so I'm going to select BC1 tip, wait for the temperature to come back up. You'll hear a beep. There we go. I'll let the temperature settle on a 10 my tip. And I'm going to put just the tiniest minute bit of solder. It's kind of hard. I'm not going to do that on camera because I really need to be able to focus. So just put a tiny bit of solder and lots of flux. You really need to use lots of flux for this. Oh, just lifted the cable. I had it lined up almost perfectly. This cable is so small. I have to get back in here with my tweezers. Oh, jeez. This is definitely one of my most difficult soldering projects I've done yet. I'm going to have to re-add that flux. It's probably already evaporated. I'll do that in a moment. And I definitely don't have the steadiest of hands. Okay. Not quite happy with that alignment. Okay, so now I'm going to just reflux it. Put my tip down for a moment. I'm going to tack it down kind of to the right of my tweezers there. Get a little bead of, just a tiny bead of solder. Tiny, tiny, tiny. And I've bridged it. All right. Well, at least now it's holding in place, so I can hopefully I'm just very gently kind of almost wiping the pads, wiping down from the pads to from the pins to the pads, I should say. That bridge is not wanting to clear. I'm going to try and get the rest of these pads here. May have to bring in a little bit of let me get my loop so I can get a closer look at what's going on here. I have to bring out some braid and try and clear that bridge. I definitely can't have the camera in the way. All right, I think I cleared that bridge. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to check. I'm going to just check and make sure I don't have a bridge. So what I'm going to do is I should not get continuity when touching anything but the same pin. Good there. Good there. Okay, I've got some bridging going on there. Let me reflow this. I know this is making for, I'm going to do this off camera. Okay, so what I thought were bridges were actually, they're not bridging through the pads. They're actually like ground pins. So of course ground is going to test continuity to any other ground if it's a common ground. So I think I'm good there. Now we're going to move on to the hardest part of this install, which is the dreaded GPU. Move my solder braid out of the way. The GPU flex cable, which has to go right here. And these pins are so small. Let me tell you, it is not a joke. So the idea is going to be to the idea is going to be to line this up with those, line the teeth up with those edges. Now this first pad here is going to line up with that first pin. Let's see if I can get it to line up here. And then there's that anchor point right to the left of my finger. So you kind of want to, I like to use what I found is working for me is to use that left side to kind of align it. And I'm going to go with the install tip from the creator of the mod, Dan Coons. I'm going to, line it up. I'm going to tack it somewhere in the middle. Of course, flux, flux, flux. Tack it somewhere in the middle, and then kind of work my way outward from each side. So let's see. Like I said, you want those little teeth to line up with the pins on the pads. These pins are incredibly fragile on this chip. Like, it's not even a joke. And actually, I'm gonna have to double check, but I think that first pin actually lines up with that copper pad. But I'm gonna double check before I tack it down. But I'm gonna tack down essentially from the middle to kind of get it just mechanically in place. Tack it in the middle, and then kind of work my way out to each side. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. All right, so I've got it tacked down somewhat in the middle. Not seeing any awful bridges so far. So I switched back to my J-tip, and I'm just going with like just the I'm barely touching. See, that was too much. I am just barely touching, like just a tiny little dab of solder loaded onto my tip when I tacked it down. And I used lots of flux. So I'm going to go ahead and work toward the right side out first, kind of holding this flex cable in place with, I need more flux. Kind of holding this flex cable in place with my tweezers as I work my way outward. Lots and lots of flux. Flux is your friend. And I'm just going to kind of push down. And I'm almost kind of like Bob Rossing it here. Almost like just the gentlest touch. Almost like a paintbrush with just the very tip, the teeny tiny tip of this tip. Just the tip. And I'm almost like a wiping motion. And I'm going to have to change my angle here a little bit. I think I made a bridge. I'm going to do the rest of this off camera because my phone's really getting in the way here. I was touch and go there for a while. I had to really get up in there with my 10x magnifier loop. But thankfully I didn't bend any of the pins. That would have been the worst thing. But I did create some bridges up high on the pins accidentally. But it looks like it is clear now. So we're going to move on to actually assembling the, putting the motherboard back in place and assembling the PS1Digital board and hooking up all this. Why I didn't test continuity on that GPU flex. Those pins are so close together and my probes are really not fine pitched enough. But there's some test points you can actually do on the PS1Digital itself. So first order of business, we've got the lower part of the chassis, lower RF shield in place. So we're going to go ahead and gently seat our the motherboard here. You don't want to force it in. There's going to be, again, these like plastic standoffs. So now you may be wondering, well, where does the board go? Well, let's go ahead and get it out of its packaging. It's in this anti-static bag. This is riveting television, I'm sure. I have issues getting this out of the bag because I didn't have scissors handy. So here it is. This is where the magic happens. So you want to hold that flex cable up, the audio one, because it's kind of going to fit right there. So oh, my thermal pad came off. Okay, so the main FPGA here, so Intel Cyclone 10, it's going to run a little hot, so we need to make sure we have our thermal pad affixed to it. It's going to use that top thicker piece of RF shielding as a heat sink. So lift that back in place. And that's kind of, I'm just going to hold tight there for a minute. Included with the kit is a 3D printed serial port replacement. That's going to be where the HDMI cable goes. But there's also these two standoffs. So I just wanted to do a quick test fit before I put those in place. So here they are. Just kind of work these off. Actually, I'm going to cut them off with my flush cutters. Set this aside for the moment. And just a little bit of plastic burrs I'm going to trim off here. These little plastic standoffs. I'll show you where those go momentarily. I'm going to clip these burrs off camera so the plastic doesn't get in the case here. So these are actually going to go right here where the serial port screws went. And they just kind of line them up with the holes there. And let's make sure we are aligned. Looks like we are. So I'm going to go ahead and screw the motherboard screws back in. This is just to, or at least for the serial port, you know, to hold the PS1Digital in place, so that I can then attach the flex cables to their sockets. Where did I put that screwdriver? Ah, here it is. Okay. So, again, countersink. You don't want to wrench this on too tight where you might break the board. You mainly just want to get it hand tight. I mean, you don't want it going anywhere. All right. So these cables, you know, you just kind of flip these up. The cables kind of just go in there like so. May have to get my tweezers to help me with this. That doesn't look right. There we go. You want to make sure this is an even amount showing there. And again, I'm going to zoom back out. Now, that was the serial port flex. So now we're going to lift the socket for the audio flex. Push that in there gently. Lock it down. Looks good. Well, no, I didn't quite get it seated in there all the way. There we go. All right. And the flex cable, it's going to have a little bit of sticky tape right here that you can peel off to kind of crease it down onto this chip here. Let me zoom out so you can actually see what I'm doing. It's going to have a little piece of sticky tape right there. You peel off to give it structural support to this chip. I'm just going to gently crease it for now because I want to test this first before I commit to the tape there. All right. Actually, let me crease that down a little bit, just so I'm not putting too much stress on those pins. And finally, we're going to do the controller flex. This one, you've got to kind of do like bend it up and then kind of put it at an angle here. You don't really have to worry about creasing it. The only one you really have to worry about creasing is the GPU flex. So I'm going to grab a small HDMI monitor and actually, you know what? I just realized I'm a dumbass. I forgot to hook the X-Station ribbon cable to the underside of the board. So let me do that. All right, time for the moment of truth. I have a little old 720p HD TV. Got power, controller, power, HDMI connected. So let's power it up. Got a solid blue light. That's good news. But no video. Well, it's getting some kind of signal. Make sure it's on the right input. Yep, it's on HDMI. The guide says if you get a solid blue light, then everything's good. So, might be defaulting to 1080p, and this monitor may not like 1080p. So, let me double check on that.